National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. This podcast is brought to you through the generous support of the Albert and Ethel Herstein Charitable Foundation. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss the depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And today our special guests are Mike Scott, movie critic for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune.
Happy to be here.
Josh Schick, curator here at the museum.
Hi, Seth.
And Kaylee Martin, historian here at the museum.
Glad to be here.
Today we will be discussing the 1958 submarine film Run Silent, Run Deep. The film centers on the actions of the fictional submarine Nurka after she is placed under the command of veteran skipper whose previous boat had been sunk underneath him. The skipper and executive officer are at odds throughout the film as the obsessed skipper takes his new boat into the most dangerous waters in Japan to sink his former tormentor. Run Silent, Run Deep stars Clark Gable as Commander Richardson, Burt Lancaster as his executive officer Bledsoe, Jack Warden, and Don Rickles. The film was directed by Robert Wise and written by John Gay, based off of the novel of the same name by Commander Edward Beach. So we'll start, and Mike, I'll start with you because you're our out-of-house guest. In your opinion, how accurate is Run Silent, Run Deep?
Well, first I have to confess, I'm a layman. I'm a civilian, so this is coming from a civilian's perspective. But I got to tell you, authenticity is so important to a movie like this. But it really did feel like this one lived up to it. They went a long way. Burt Lancaster, in addition to starring in it, was also one of the producers. And authenticity was very, very important to him. He brought some technical advisors in. He had the help of the Navy as well. I think the production spent $500,000 to acquire some Navy gear that they used to build their submarine set. It was actually the exteriors were a real submarine, the Redfish, but the interior sets, the interior of the submarine was a soundstage. But for the life of me, I wouldn't be able to tell. It looked pretty darn authentic to me, as well as the interaction of the crew felt real and felt authentic. And that's, you got guys like Don Rickles, who was a World War II vet, so I guess he kind of knew the part a little bit before coming in.
Yeah, I would agree. Kaylee, what do you think?
Oh, yeah. One of the things I'm always amazed of when I watch the film is all of the actors don't seem like actors. They seem like they really know their place and what they're doing. And the thing that amazed me every time he yells, "Lookouts below." And the way those guys fly down those ladders, like they'd been doing it for years. And it's those little details like that. And when they call for prepare for dive or to fire, everyone moves like they know exactly where they want to go. And it's beautifully choreographed to where it looks so natural. And it really adds to that authenticity.
Yeah, I think that the last card, or the final frame of the movie is a card that thanks the Department of Defense for their participation, as well as Submarine Flotilla 1. And what they did was they got real submariners to sort of coach the crew a little bit, to kind of hang out with them and give them some instruction of, no, you wouldn't lean on it like that. You'd lean on it like this. You'd wear it like that. And I think I think that's the payoff was what you're talking about.
Definitely.
Josh?
I agree on all those fronts. I mean, it's one of those things where it has depth, which is what makes that accuracy comes through.
Is that a submarine pun?
Well, no. I've been working on the submarine puns. I got subplots to talk about.
That's a good one.
We're going to really dive into this one. I don't want to ruin our broadcasting numbers. But anyway, so we're going to look at it's got depth. So you can buy the gear, you can make a neat set. But like Kaylee was saying, the way they're moving, the way they're interacting, being coached. And then like any good war movie from that time period, they usually recruit, and the Navy seems to be very good about this. Even sailors in the background, doing little menial tasks, helping them dock it, coaching them. So it was a wonderful movie. I mean, even dialogue spot on. And my love of sarcasm is that generation, that type of sarcasm always shines through in a good movie like this. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree with everybody here. I think the accuracy in this movie is really in the minutiae, in the details. If you've read any books about submarine warfare in World War II, and especially books by Richard O'Kane, captain of the USS Tang, and then previous to that, the executive officer of the Wahoo. He goes through every single detail of how every single attack was set up when he was skipper of the Tang. And it's as if these people read that book, and of course they didn't because his book was written after this movie came out, but it's as if they read that book and followed that script. I mean, it's literally to the T. everything they do, from every little verbal command to every little action that they perform inside the boat, and they are boats. The submarines are boats, not ships.
Yep.
But inside the boat is, like you said, is verbatim to what real sailors would have done. And like you were saying, Mike, having real sailors there to coach them certainly did pay off, and you can see that, very, very clearly. The submarine in this movie is named the Nurka. And, all submarines, well, at least in World War II, all submarines were named after fish. And it leads one to believe that there was a submarine called the Nurka. And let me also get into this a bit. Was the Nurka's, or Clark Gable's tormentor, if you will, was a skipper, and the destroyer Akakazi. Was there a Nurka and was there an Akakazi? Were they real?
I can do the Nurka one for you. Is that yes, there was a planned Nurka. Yeah, she was on the ways, but it was eventually canceled. I think it was in '44. And believe it or not, even before the war ends, they're already thinking about tooling up or tooling down, how it affects it. So Nurka's on the ways, but never gets completed as a contract boat. So could have been, but wasn't.
Yeah.
Nurka is also one of the boats that's featured in Beach's book. Mm-hmm. And one of the main character in that book, one of his buddies, who was Richardson in the book, one of his friends is a captain of the Nurka. So that's another source for that name.
Mm-hmm. The Akakazi, the enemy ship that is the main enemy ship in this movie, she was a real vessel too. In the film, they show her to be, this ace submarine killing machine, and that in reality that was not the case. But there was a destroyer called the Akakazi. Anybody want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, she was actually commissioned in 21, so she was pretty old by the time we get to where the story takes place, and she did some convoy work. Is credited with sinking one U.S. sub, I believe.
Yeah.
And then she was actually torpedoed herself by a U.S. sub, the Pintado, in late '44. But she did run some convoys, including a really infamous story where she was moving prisoners, and there was an event on board where they massacred 60 prisoners, including young children and babies. And it's a pretty nasty story.
Yeah. From what I read, the skipper of the Akakazi actually had this contraption constructed on the stern of the vessel. It was basically like an A-frame. And they used a hook, and they tied these people up by the wrists and hoisted them up by the wrists and shot them, and then dumped them overboard. The men first, then the women. And then I think it was either 3. I've seen reports that said 3, and some reports that said 4 children.
Yeah, I've seen the 3.
Between the ages of newborn and 4 years old, and they threw them overboard alive.
Yeah.
And
these were also missionaries, nuns.
Europeans, too.
Yeah.
Germans.
Yeah.
And I think there were some Americans, some Chinese, some Australians. It was a very mixed group of individuals. And like I said, a lot of them were missionaries in the Pacific Islands who had been rounded up or being transported.
It's an interesting thought line, too, because apparently there are witnesses to this, survivors from the Akakazi who maybe got transferred off before she was sunk. And there is proceedings and war crimes, but it seems to go nowhere. It goes through a couple different Allied commands, arrives at the Americans' footstep, and either through evidence or lost to at least the time and our ability to search in the last week to see that trial went anywhere. But it does make me wonder if he picked the name of that ship because it was associated with an atrocity like this, because the book ending of the Akakazi is much different than the movie ending, and the book ending is a little bit more appropriate to what the Akakazi did in real life as far as taking the crew out.
I wonder how much public knowledge there was of the Akakazi. Can anybody speak to that? Whether people would have known that the Akakazi was this vile ship, the reputation of it, which would have made it a great name for an enemy ship, really.
Right. I don't think the American public knew at that point. I could be wrong here, but I'm fairly certain that they were unaware of this. I mean, I've studied World War II my whole life, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know about this until this week.
Same here.
Same here.
So
Beach would have known, though.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Beach, as an officer in the Navy, no doubt would have heard about this.
Absolutely.
And could be the reason why he used it in his original book as this vile ship.
Do you remember when the book was published?
55, I think.
55, okay, yeah. So by that time, he was a commander. He was up in there. He certainly would have had access to
It would have had to come out. That's why I always wondered if he'd chosen
possible.
that name on
Well,
purpose.
atrocities committed by Japanese destroyer crews was not just limited to the Akakazi. Of course, it happened at Midway, too, among other places. It's interesting you said how you talked about how she was sunk. It's actually, well, not to give credit to a, murderous crew, but it was actually kind of commendable what they did. They sacrificed themselves. The destroyer pulled in front of American torpedoes to save, I forget which Japanese carrier, but to save Japanese carrier, they were destroyed in return. Well, Gable plays an almost Captain Ahab kind of like skipper here. He's obsessed with sinking the skipper of this Akakazi. In you guys' opinions, could this have happened in the real silent service? I mean, there's a little hint, if anybody knows anything about Douglas Morton, Mush Morton, he tended to be a little obsessed with tracking down enemy vessels, and so did Dick O'Kane. But I don't know of any stories of an Ahab-like skipper who goes off on his own to do this. What do you guys think?
I mean, looking at it, the majority of sub-commanders, not that this means they're all perfect, but were Annapolis grads, so they were professional Navy men. A lot of them graduate 35, mid-30s, late 30s, things like that. And ultimately, when it comes down to their orders is to sink enemy shipping. And there's a priority list, and usually destroyers and escorts are a little bit lower down on that list. They want tankers, they want things. So when they're coming after Japanese shipping, an escort is an escort. It's a threat, it's something to be concerned about. And there's a lot of ship classes that are the same. So, there are ways to tell a difference between them, but you're not going to be able to really go gallivanting across Pacific because you want to find this one guy.
But that's no fun from a
finish him.
storytelling standpoint.
That is very true.
And
That's Hollywood for you.
War is methodical.
And I just wonder, like you're saying, with the level these sub-commanders were at, would they have risked their career to disobey direct orders, as he does in the movie, to go after this guy? If he had been there, that'd be one thing, but to go into an area they were expressly forbidden to enter, which was dangerous, they've lost submarines, I don't know. I don't know if a commander would have taken that risk.
I sincerely doubt they would have. I mean, first of all, to go into an area that you're ordered to not go into, you're directly disobeying orders from, up on high. And like you were saying, these guys are pros. They're not going to do that. I'm not saying that they didn't disobey every now and then or bend the rules.
Yeah.
But as so far as breaking them in that regard, I would
You also
say no.
hang yourself out to dry. If you leave your patrol zone,
Yeah,
even
you're
if you
screwed.
kind of fudge
Yeah.
it a little bit, if something goes wrong, they know where you were.
They know
or
where you
what
should
time.
be.
Yeah. So, on the off chance they can say, hey, go over there and check out where X submarine is supposed to be. They can do that. But if you're off over there, and you didn't tell anyone, you've created a problem for yourself.
Yeah. And I can recall of only one period, maybe two, where American submarines were expressly told not to go into a specific area of the Japanese home islands, the waters. And that was because of, heavy anti-submarine patrols, mines, a lot of mines.
Usually minefields.
Stuff like that. And even then, when Wahoo was lost, there was a, a lack of penetration into the Japanese home waters after that, because it really shook Admiral Lockwood to the core when his star boat was sunk, but or thought to be sunk, and obviously later proven to be sunk. But there was like only one time, and maybe later in the war, I think, maybe. And correct me if I'm wrong. I don't recall exactly, but generally that they were given free rein to really kind of do what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
But given express orders to stay out of an area, they would have done that. World War II era U.S. Navy fleet boats were crewed by the elite of the Navy. If you take the men who won their wings of gold, the naval aviators, out of it, as far as standard sailors are concerned, sub-sailors were the elite. They were all volunteers. Nobody got thrown into a submarine or, drafted and put in. That didn't happen. You volunteered to go to sub school. You volunteered. It was a complete volunteer force. And they were famous for having very, very high morale. They swaggered when they strolled down the sidewalks in front of the Royal Hawaiian in Hawaii. Despite the risks, they were famous for having high morale. How accurate is the portrayal of the inner work? And we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but how accurate are the inner workings of a World War II fleet sub shown in this movie in regards to the crew, in regards to the the lingo and stuff like that? What do you guys think about that?
I love it. I mean, I don't know, it's good. You do have officers enlisted, they're separate, They're working in tight spaces together. A couple of the guys, I think Don Rickles points out at one point, he says, like, they're amazed that another officer chews out another one in front of them. There's also a really great relationship in there with the chief. Mm-hmm. And the chief is at the level with the officers, but he's working with those enlisted men. So, like, the interpersonal reactions in there are great. Mm-hmm. And then the way they're all moving in there it's very convincing. It's very ship-like.
The one I thought was interesting, I think is it Jimmy, the young guy that wins the bet? And he goes, oh, is he downstairs? And they have to go below decks. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a little interesting, but that this kid's clearly swept into this and he's clueless. Yeah. But, it's not to say that didn't happen every once in a while. Some young kid, wet behind the ears, gets down there, but learns very quickly. But
I don't know.
It did stick out to me, though, as to be very green to not even be able to say, oh, is he below decks? That was...
Yeah.
It was a little odd. But aside from that, yeah. And one of the things I like is the levels of undress. Mm-hmm. So chambray shirts with the sleeves cut off. Everybody's got holes, patches, tears. And it's this real, like, worn-in, lived-in look that these guys would have had, because you're talking a shower maybe once every 10 days. You're on patrol for, was it 60 days they're out?
At least.
At least.
Yeah.
You're back and you have maybe 2-3 weeks to recuperate, restore the boat, and get back out there. So it had this kind of broken-in feel to the crew, and just their look with their uniforms and things that they were wearing.
There's also a very interesting thing that's just kind of slid into the movie is African-American presence aboard submarines. Mm-hmm. You've got officers, mess attendants, but, I mean, in this movie, he's literally part of the crew. Like, you almost don't even realize that he's separate from the crew because he's in these normal interactions. He's actually working in the torpedo room during one of the attacks. It's very interesting how he's represented in there.
Which is accurate.
Yeah, it's totally accurate.
The crew of a submarine, there were like 87...
Yeah,
78,
roughly.
It depended.
Yeah.
Some crews were
they
bigger.
Start
than
adding
others.
more equipment.
Right, but I mean, it's a small, tight-knit group of people, and that's a topic we'll get to here in a minute. But, with that tight-knit group, you get really close to those people. Mm-hmm. And then, like you said, Mike, the sound stages that they shot this stuff on, I mean, it's tight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's tight. You see guys as they're passing each other through the passageways of the submarine. They're bumping into each other. Yeah. They're knocking each other into the bulkheads. They're ricocheting off the floor. It's tight. It's very obvious that when they shot this, the soundstage was a hell of a lot tighter than this room is right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you wouldn't. The movie cameras, even now, are pretty large. In 1958, they would have been enormous. There would have been no way they would have been able to efficiently fit down into a submarine. So I guarantee you, even what we saw, probably some of those walls flew away. They could move it so they can move the camera wherever they needed it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like if you didn't know any better, your instinct wouldn't be, oh, this is a soundstage. Like other sub movies are very clearly soundstage. Mm-hmm. And Mike, you mentioned all the money that they spent on the gear. Yeah, it was $500,000 in gear they borrowed. So they have the torpedo data computer and all these detailed things that are working. Yeah. And I love that, how those are integrated into the movie, and like it gets its own moment in the spotlight. And
well, if they're going to pay for it, and I guarantee you the producer said, let's use it.
But so many submarine movies don't go into that detail. I mean, every compartment is jam-packed. And if you look at some of the other ones, especially some of the comedies, they don't go to that length. And they really outdid themselves with this one.
Even if you look at some of the movies that aren't comedies, like Operation Pacific with John Wayne or Destination Tokyo with Cary Grant, I mean, it looks like the inside of a battleship in there. Yeah. And all these guys, they can stretch out and do whatever they want. There's no hint of any claustrophobia in there, whereas in this movie there is.
That's one of the things that sticks out. There's three things about that set, and John Wayne kind of plays into one of them for me. Is like when they're jumping down the hatch or pulling that toggle and they're pulling that thing tight. If the big actor in Operation Tokyo and all that goes down the hatch, someone else goes up and seals it up. Where you see Clark Gable holding on to that thing, pulling that hatch down. He's interacting with it. You've got people body checking each other in there because there's not a lot of room. Mm-hmm. And then the only thing that stuck out as funny to me was anytime there's dead space in that soundstage, they seem to put a clock there. Yeah. So if you look around in the background, you'll see like 3-day boat clocks in there. Like that's 3 8-day clocks tied together. I guess they just needed to fill up some space. Looks cool, but when you're like looking at these details, you're like, man, they're really concerned about the time.
Do the combat scenes in this movie show what submarine warfare was like in the Pacific? And I'll answer that before you guys do. No, it does not. There's an awful lot of surface attacks in the daylight.
Broad daylight.
Yes.
Yeah, in this movie, which never would have occurred, not unless the submarine was, mortally wounded and had no other option. But surface attacks were obviously carried out, but they were carried out under the cover of darkness, so they could shoot and beat it and get away. But, a submarine is a submarine. That's why it's called a submarine. So it can dive and attack, stealthily at all periods of the day or night. And they show a lot of surface fighting on this movie.
The other thing to me is it seemed almost too easy to find targets. And that's one of the things I've read is, at least at a certain point, getting targets was a challenge. And they could be out there for a week, 2 weeks before they'd see anything. And, they're not even in their area, and they've got a sub. And then, conveniently, 2 days later, it seems, here's a convoy. And maybe part of that is a film and the shortened timelines.
Sure, yeah.
But it almost seemed a little too easy that, we're looking for the Akakazian. Here she is.
Well, that's the beauty of film. And then one of the things I like about this movie is that it clocks in at a really neat 94 minutes.
Yep.
And so if they would have
nice.
tried to get that whole feeling of ennui as
Yeah.
they're floating around, it would have been like Tora, where you start to yawn after a while.
Or Das Boot, where you've been watching it for 6
Yes.
weeks,
Yeah.
and you're still not there.
Right.
And then you're like, man, this water's green.
But aside from that, they're when they're depth charged, I think a lot of the depth charge scenes are very, very Hollywood. I guess it's to add excitement. It's to add drama or whatever. If depth charges would have gone off as close to a real submarine as they showed in that movie, there would have been no more NERCA. It would have been gone. It would be at the bottom of the Pacific. And
I think that's something very hard for movies to communicate, that being sunk by depth charges is like being beaten to death in the most brutal way you can imagine. It's going to get close. It's going to get close. And then, I think one of those depth charges bangs off the dive flaps, and it's just like, I'm sorry, if it had hit that close and gone off underneath that boat, I'd have smoked that whole boat. I'd have been gone in an instant.
Yeah.
And there's one bit where an underwater scene shows it rolls like 90 degrees, but when they cut to the guys inside, they're all standing up perfectly.
Yeah, I think the only thing with the combat that is good and accurate is just what's going on in the boat.
Yeah.
Regardless of our daylight runs. And I'm not going to lie, I thought the models were well done.
That's what I was going to say.
I enjoyed the models. I thought the explosions were good. They weren't too fireball-y.
Yeah. You could tell they were miniatures just because of the water. The size of the water droplets were a little big. But I thought it was really well done. I thought it was actually kind of charming that you could tell. You could see the strings from time to time.
Yeah.
Underwater.
Torpedoes.
I kind of like that.
I'm pretty sure they had the same pool for all these sub movies where they fire the torpedoes and they look like they're in a swimming pool. You can kind of see that behind them.
There was two things about the models that cracked me up. Is I thought they were all well done, except the NERCA sometimes looked like a bathtub toy. And then the Akakazi, the way they built it, it's like an IJN Fletcher class, but they put two little searchlights on it, so it looks like it's got little horns on it. It looks like a little dragon with little horns on top of it. I thought it was a funny touch.
They did have some amazing shots of the submarine, though, and especially that one where the camera's looking back towards the superstructure, and as it goes, as it submerges.
The real boat? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's
totally.
some really awesome. But I do think that the actual, torpedo firing scenes and the way they're lining those things up and the language, those things always seemed really good.
Oh, yeah, totally. No, when they're on the surface, and I forget the name of the piece of the equipment, the exterior sighting.
Target bearing transmitter.
That's it. Thank you very much. When they're looking through that, there is no verbal communication. The man who's looking through it, there's a little button that they hit, and that little button transmits a little downstairs. Listen to Jimmy. Down below to the crew down below, and then you hear that.
Yeah.
And this is the only movie that I can. I mean, it's small, and for people outside of this circle of people that we're sitting here talking would be like, whatever. But it's cool.
Yeah.
Because that's a level of detail that no other submarine movie's done.
And the pickle.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, the pickle. You rarely see him actually working the pickle to work the periscopes.
Yeah.
And
Don Rickles on the pickle. the buzzer thing really struck home with me, because like my little like one half claim to fame is that I've actually operated on a running PT boat, and buzzers are the way those boats communicate as well. And that was kind of our first experience with it, is that we have a bridge buzzer button and an engine room buzzer. And you can't hear each other, but you can shoot messages back and forth, and everyone has an agreement. And that to me was an amazing detail, because that's something that was very common then. You have to learn how to communicate on a ship non-verbally using these things. And it's, beep, beep means, hey, pay attention, and then beep, take the bearings. You figure it out pretty quickly. It's intuitive. It makes sense. And in real life, those buzzers are loud. They're like violently loud. And it's pretty cool detail that they added.
Well, another detail that they added in here, they dumped the trash. And, of course, this is how the Japanese find them.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. This is how the Japanese find them and find out where they are and who they are and all this other stuff. I forget the cook's name. He's a goofball.
Yeah,
He's the, quote, comic relief, unquote.
He was one of Burt Lancaster's friends from his circus days.
Really?
So?
Yes.
I did not know
He
that.
performed in a circus with Burt Lancaster.
He looked like a circus performer.
Yeah.
Nothing against circus performers.
Connies.
Small hands. But let's talk about that. Was that a common occurrence?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've read some accounts that guys say they think that the Japanese occasionally did pick up some intel from trash. So I think that's true to things that could happen. And it's hard to conceive them putting anything overboard that could be sensitive, but you're creating a lot of waste and you got nowhere to put it.
Actual submarine galleys have got a purpose-built trash can, with hooks on the outside that you put the burlap sack in, and then you hook it to, and then it's go
Just
get rid of it.
indiscriminately, they don't.
Well, I mean, as soon as they fill it, but it's kind of like in your kitchen. If you leave stuff in there long enough, you're going to get fruit flies and stuff. So you don't want to have all the steak bits you cut up the other night rotten in there and everything. But also, there are the demands of the service. If it stinks and you can't go up on the surface, then too bad. Get over it. We'll close the lid. But yeah, it does seem kind of odd that they'd put let's put operational documents and people's names and maybe birthdays and list of fears or something. It's a strange thing to throw in the trash and not weight it down thoroughly.
Yeah. And weighting it down is something too. I mean, they would weight it down with shells or, like you said, like it even says in the movie, broken tools or whatever it may be, just to get it to sink. One of the people that are in this movie that's in this movie that's very prominent, but you never see her, is an infamous woman named Tokyo Rose. She's you hear her throughout. Well, I wouldn't say throughout the movie, but about halfway through to the end, essentially. How true to life would you say this is, and would the reception be that crystal clear on the sub? And I would say it would depend on how close to Japan you were, frankly, as to the reception. But how true was these guys listening to Tokyo Rose? I mean,
From what I've read, some of her biggest audience actually was guys on subs. One of the reasons is because there was program ran at night. So they're surfaced at night and they can listen to it. And there's some really great stories out there. The guy said, we kind of had some affection for her. We didn't see women for long periods of time. It was a pleasant female voice, and she played the best music. So she was very popular among sub crews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was popular from a lot of guys.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the point of her. I mean, she was supposed to be somewhat alluring, right?
Right.
Wasn't that the idea?
Yeah, a lot of them said they didn't buy into her propaganda. They thought a lot of it was silly, but they did get freaked out when they did hear things. I read one account where a guy said the first we heard of the Wahoo sinking was Tokyo Rose, and that scared him a little bit. But they said for the most part, she tried to make you believe your girlfriend was off with some 4F at home, and a lot of them said they didn't feel any animosity towards her.
I think it's worth mentioning too that there wasn't one Tokyo Rose.
Mm-hmm.
There was one that became the poster child for Tokyo Roses, but there were Tokyo Rosei, many of them.
Rosei. Yeah, Iva Togori was the one that was actually prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I know what you're talking about. Submariners, submariners, whatever you want to call them. They do remember with some fondness Tokyo Rose. But you're right. It was mostly just cheesy propaganda and good music. But when those occasional bits of actual real, hey, we know where you are kind of stuff, and she could prove it, That did freak him out, man. I mean, it freaked me out.
Yeah, I
certainly.
read a guy on the North Carolina said she talked about the North Carolina sank. He's like, according to her, I think we sank twice.
Yeah, well, it's the Japanese, according to, sailors aboard the Enterprise, they sank the Enterprise, 6 or 7 times.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons she was called
Lexington, Houston,
Galloping Ghost of the Oahu Coast. Rear Admiral Rob Roy McGregor. Great name.
Yes.
By the way.
Like to have a Rob Roy, please.
Served as technical advisor for this film. Mike, you talked about this briefly. How do you see that coming through? I mean, and again, we've kind of talked about this at almost ad nauseum here about the lingo and the uniforms and stuff like that. But how obvious was it that there was a seasoned technical advisor on this film?
I think if you watch many submarine movies, then it becomes obvious, because it's obvious when it's not the case. So if you compare this film side by side to most other or many other submarine films, it becomes obvious that somebody along the way here knew what they were talking about or cared enough to get it right.
And I agree, and I think it also has something to do with the time that this movie was made too, because if you look, the 3 quote serious submarine movies that I think about are this one, Operation Pacific, and Destination Tokyo. Destination Tokyo was made during the war. So there's not a whole hell of a lot that they could divulge that they didn't want to get out to the enemy. One of the technical advisors we talk about Wahoo, one of the technical advisors on Destination Tokyo was Mush Morton. And I mean, if there was anybody who was up to snuff on submarine tactics, it would be him. But again, I think it was because there's only so much that they could let out, whereas in this movie in 1958, it was released in 58, so 56, 57 when it was being made, they didn't care.
Yeah.
Because
That's why
the war had been won. So.
And that's why you get these beautiful shots of the torpedo data computer and all this equipment, because it was no longer restricted sensitive information.
Yeah. Even the silhouette on that submarine's dated. It's not a guppy conversion yet. We're moving into the nuclear age, approaching the 60s and everything. So it's like, everything there is like, we can let them know now. It is interesting. It's a healthy genre of movies. I didn't realize how many submarine movies are out there. Even as early as the teens, there's submarine movies coming out. And I think it really speaks that this one's so well done from a technical standpoint.
What about Operation Petticoat?
Classic.
I love that movie.
I'll tell you what, that one did better than this one did at the box office, as well made as this one is. And I think the reason behind that is fairly simple. That one was in color. That mattered to moviegoers at the time. It was in color because, that's the one where they famously paint the...
Yeah, you
paint,
can't communicate that in black and white.
But if you're shooting a submarine movie, and it's the same cinematographer on both films. Russell Harlan was his name, which I think is interesting. And if you're shooting a submarine film and you're being serious about it, and you're not going to be painting anything pink, and you're trying to save a little bit of money because you just you're paying $500,000 for the rights to put the technical gear around your set, it makes sense to maybe try to save a couple of dollars on color, because a submarine is a pretty monochromatic affair, right? Everything's painted, gunship gray. Everybody's wearing khaki or T-shirts. Maybe you might have the green blip on the sonar, and that's about the only, or the radar. That's about the only real color you're going to have or the pinup poster.
Right.
So it seems to me a pretty smart way to cut corners, but I think it ended up to come around and bite them. I think that's why this one didn't perform as well at the box office.
Yeah, I did not know that. That's interesting to know that their same guy did both flicks. Mm-hmm. What do you think? What do you guys think of the casting? We talked about Don Rickles, the age of the actors in this movie, and the number of veterans. What are your opinions on that?
Well, I can tell you from what I've read, one of the big criticisms on the movie is the age of Burt Lancaster and Clark Gable. They would have been far too old to really be the commander of a sub. I think Clark Gable was about 57 at the time, and Burt Lancaster was 12 years or so younger, so he would have been around 45. And Beach, the guy who wrote the book on which it was based, he wrote this based on his real experiences that he experienced as like a 24-year-old, 25-year-old. So I think that's a legitimate criticism there.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are going to start, when you look at pictures from the war after a patrol or two, these guys do start to look haggard and much older than their years. But not in their 40s.
Not Clark Gable old.
But even the crew. I mean, there's I think they're like radiomen, sonarmen. I mean, he looks like he's in his 40s, and he says this is only his second patrol. I mean, the only one that looked the appropriate age was Jimmy.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that 100%. I mean, these were young guys, kids, who were crewing these boats, and even the skippers, like Morton was class of 34 from the
Yeah.
Academy, and O'Kane was class of 36.
40-41 would have been old for a sub-commander.
It would have been ancient for a submarine
I think
commander.
the oldest submarine commander was about 40. When he died in like 43.
Yeah. Sam Dealey was a little bit older than most, and or not Dealey. I always say Gilmore.
Yeah.
Gilmore was a little older.
I think that's
than
what I'm
most.
thinking about.
But I mean, Morton was in his 30s, early 30s, and O'Kane was as well.
And
you know.
especially your junior officers, some of them are going to be 90-day wonders.
Yeah, some of them would, yeah, but
They're going to be young.
But they're going to be young, and some of them are going to be Academy grads. But even then,
They're going to be.
they're going to be younger. They're going to be class of 40, 41,
Yeah.
42 maybe.
I think that everyone is older on the scale, but I think that their age and experience being that age in the 50s puts them more in touch with who was in there, and so that adds a certain quality to their movement, their language, and everything. But then you look and you're like, okay, there's a couple extra lines on their face that I think are not age appropriate. I think Burt Lancaster he doesn't look too bad in it, and everyone does look a little bit older, but I think that not that this was like their choice or anything, but by using those older guys, they got a better quality as opposed to hiring a bunch of very young-looking actors who had no experience with the World War II generation or service or in the Navy, and they would be kind of moving around. They wouldn't look so fluid on that set unless they had trained on it for weeks and weeks before they started filming.
Yeah, I think also this is where the reality, the military reality, collides with the Hollywood practicality. Because in addition to what you're saying, getting the experience there, you want to have those big names on the movie poster.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You want to be able to get those butts in the seat. And if you don't have the names, people aren't going to go see it. But Clark Gable, oh my goodness, Rhett Butler's going to be in another war, and Burt Lancaster, the two of them on the same bill. That was pretty remarkable. So
yeah, I mean, even at that stage, you're right. Gable was still bringing in the.
I think he was. A lot of people think he was past his prime, but he was still a box office draw.
And one of the things I read about why the movie didn't perform as well is because he had a second film that came out in the same year that was a hit and did better. So if you
Gable
have your
fatigue, is that what that is?
yeah, I mean, or
syndrome.
If you have your limited funds to go see a film, you've got two to pick from if he's your favorite. But
I will say Gable said crash very strangely. He said crash like twice in
Did
there.
he?
Yeah, it kept sticking out. I was like, why does he keep saying it like that?
he also gives a really good stink eye.
Yeah, he wasn't happy on the set, from what I understand. There was a lot of butting of heads between he and Burt Lancaster. Again, Lancaster was one of the producers of the film, and so he hired Gable. And Gable really didn't want the young kid to upstage him. So he was apparently quite difficult to work with. In fact, the actor hired to play Mueller, the first actor hired to play Mueller, from what I understand, he left, he quit. So they got Jack Warden to fill in, which I think was great because he was good in that role.
And apparently, Gable left the set for a few days and refused to come back because he said, well, I can't give my position over to a junior officer. That can't happen. And it took several days before he acquiesced to the storyline, only with the idea of, well, you'll fall sick, and so there will be a legitimate reason for you to have to give up your command.
Right. Well, they're not going to mutiny. They're not going to violently take you. Circumstances will dictate. But that's, Hollywood ego at work.
Yeah, and he certainly had a large one, for sure. This movie is based on Captain Beech's book of the same name, Run Silent, Run Deep. How close does it get to telling the story? And Kaylee, let's shoot this one at you because I know you read the book.
Yeah.
And if somebody else did here, forgive me and please chime in, but I know you did for a fact.
Loose adaptation. Very emphasis on the loose. Some of the names are there, and it kind of picks up in the last quarter of the book where in the book, Richardson is, I'm going to defeat Bungo Pete, and he gets obsessed with this, much like the movie, but it's very different. And Beech even said, I think they bought the rights so they could have the title.
Yeah, I think he was really irritated by it. But I think, again, we talk about Clark Gable's ego. I think there was a certain amount of ego on Beech's part. He spoke a number of times about how he didn't like the adaptation because they didn't stick to the story at all. They wanted the title and they were going to make. He said, I think they wrote the script before they even bought the rights to the movie. So, I think the story itself really holds up well. I think if he would have looked at it with clear eyes, he would have said, well, they didn't ruin anything.
I did the same thing. I watched the movie and then I read the book, and I was like everyone does. Oh, book's way better. but then you watch the movie again and you realize that I think that they pulled the right elements from the book. I've compressed, obviously, our 94-minute movie format and everything. I think they pulled the right elements, the tension between CO and XO, whole thing with Yagakazi trying to get it. I think they squeezed it in there well, and as you watch it, you're like, okay, we got most of the key parts of the book, but we didn't get the great setup, and we didn't get the epic ending that the book had. That kind of doesn't make the ending of the movie seem as crazy.
Yeah. Well, the ending of the I'm not going to get into it. But it's kind of a meh ending. Just kind of goes out with a whimper. But anyway, does this movie have all the hallmarks of a submarine movie? And the by example, at the closest between the officers and men, tension, the claustrophobia, the sound design, and all that jazz. I think it does. Seeing as how it comes after the two movies that we mentioned previously, Tokyo and Operation Pacific, yeah, I think they took keys from both of those movies and apply. And it has a lot of the same Hollywood cliches, like we were talking about the depth charges, rocking everything in the boat, which they did. I mean, but it's a little violent in this movie, and the daytime surface attacks and all that jazz. But I think it does take it to a step closer, like we were talking about with the claustrophobia and the different things that they see in this movie.
The only thing that they do that the classic Hollywood move is the body out of the torpedo tube. The hallmark of every good submarine movie is we're going to shoot a body out of this thing.
It was so well done in this movie when they're shooting the tubes, and you hear the sound and the boat kind of rocks every time, and everybody just sort of tenses up every time because they know that's one of their guys. They know that's one of their brothers going out.
Yeah.
I thought it was beautifully handled in this movie, even though it's not an original idea.
It was more tastefully handled. I'll totally agree with that.
Yeah.
No, I would agree with that. You could see it in their faces. They know the first one that's shot out is trash, and everybody knows that. It's the mattress and all that stuff. So they know that's what it is, and they don't really seem to care. And then the second one goes, and the third one.
They broke them a little bit each time.
You can see
paying attention.
Right, each one that goes, they get their shoulders sag a little bit more.
Yeah.
I also thought there was a really interesting, especially because it's from that period, and I may or may not have watched it like 2 weeks ago. They Kane mutinied Clark Gable in it. They pull the Navy regs, and they tell the XO, well, you can actually take over. I mean, they literally squeezed a Kane mutiny in about a 30-second shot there, and then it goes past, and you're like, oh, yeah, they just Kane mutinied him. And, that's how the rest of the movie plays out. It just doesn't have the rotating steel balls in the trial afterwards.
And bogey. Doesn't have bogey.
Yeah.
But
can you have a, quote, submarine movie, unquote, outside of a submarine?
I would argue yes, because I think the three main keys to the genre, the submarine genre, if it's done right, is you've got the tension, that simmering danger, just because, all that water, they're in such a hostile environment. You've got the camaraderie because of the close quarters. And then you've got a certain amount of ingenuity. These guys are out down there. They're blind, basically, for the most part. And they're using this technical know-how, this technical wizardry to defeat the enemy, hopefully. They're being pursued. They're being stalked by something, whether it's the Azakazi or sometimes in a good submarine movie, it'll just be circumstances. The motors die and the engines are dying or something like that. So you'll have those three elements. And as I was watching this movie, I was thinking, this isn't too different than Apollo 13, for example. That's sort of it's like a dehydrated submarine movie. Just add water, and you got a submarine movie, right? And even Fury. I know it's a tank movie, but it's a similar circumstance. They really can't come onto that capsule, or else death awaits. Death is outside. You're separated by death by just a thin sheet of metal. Alien to a certain degree, so it is adaptable. I think because I think just the submarine genre. It's so well done. When it's done right, it's so affecting and it's so absorbing. And so I think the fact that other filmmakers seem to have adapted it to other genres, I think it's smart. It's good storytelling. It makes for a really entertaining watch.
Yeah, I never really thought about that until I saw this list of questions, and then I thought about, and I figured it was you who wrote that question, and I read that, and I was like, if you think about it, Fury is a submarine movie. Mm-hmm. Because, that whole final scene, we're not going to get into Fury. We've already done that on a previous episode of this podcast. They're locked in this, as you said, this death machine, and what awaits them outside is death. Very same thing here. Mm-hmm. And I never really thought about that till you said that, but that's very, very true. Very true. Well, the director of this movie, Robert Wise, I think he did a great job on this film, by the way. I without spoiling my final part here, it's a damn good movie. And he went on to direct, oddly enough, West Side Story and The Sound of Music.
He also previously directed The Day the Earth Stood Still.
I did not know that.
That's a pretty broad spectrum of...
That is a great movie, man. That's one of my favorites. Do you think this shows an impressive narrative range, and can you see the parallels?
I don't. I guess you can look at Sound of Music and West Side Story and say, okay, they're both musicals. You could look at, The Day the Earth Stood Still and Run Silent, Run Deep and say they're black and white. I don't know, black and white action-y movies, but I think all four of those are just. And most filmmakers, really, especially when they've been working as long as Robert Wise had, they start repeating themselves after a while. And I think it takes a really good filmmaker, a really smart filmmaker, to make that conscious decision where I am not going to repeat myself. And you have a couple of filmmakers who do that now. Alfonso Cuarón, the director of Roma, is one of those who makes a conscious decision not to repeat himself. And I don't know this for sure, but I have to think that Robert Wise made choices so he'd be challenging himself, so he'd remain interested, and that shows in the work, because those four movies are all very good movies.
They are. I mean, as I said, I had no idea he did The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is a great movie. But, I mean, if you look at that and you compare that to The Sound of Music, it's a hell of a difference.
Can you imagine the same guy did those, though? That's pretty impressive.
It really is. It really, really is. And you talk about directors who repeat themselves or try not to repeat themselves. And on the other flip side of that, you have directors who purposely repeat themselves, like John Ford. Mm-hmm. He'd play the same song, Gary Owen, in almost every single one of his cavalry or Western or Western set war movies. And he'd do the same thing. He'd have the same stable of actors all the time.
It's almost like he typecast himself. This guy does a great job of not even coming close to any of his previous movies. It's pretty impressive.
It really is. Another question I wanted to ask that I kind of skipped over because we're rolling through here. Let's talk about the movie's depiction of Japanese anti-submarine actions versus reality. In the movie, they show the Japanese having a very sophisticated anti-submarine set of tactics. They're using the Akakaze, actually, when you go through the movie, and I'm going to spoil it here, but I don't care, is not what sank Gable's first boat. It's an enemy submarine is what sank Gable's first boat. And only at the end of the movie does he realize this. So it's a very sophisticated way of hunting down American submarines. How accurate was that to the actual Japanese anti-submarine actions?
I think the technical phrase is not the case.
Yeah, I would agree.
Just not. Japanese aren't as methodical. They didn't have the quite advanced technology that we did. They were really finicky about even instituting convoy systems, which is one of the best ways to protect against submarines is, herd all your cattle or cats together and then protect them as a group. So this sort of like super ninja, crazy, innovative ways of sinking American submarines, maybe on a small case-by-case basis, but as far as the entire Imperial Japanese Navy, not really the case. Pretty far behind on destroyer escorts, which is what you really go after submarines with.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I mean, they were reliant on, air patrol close to the home islands and close to their territories. And they did set up a lot of minefields everywhere and, just kind of, pray that something would run into them that was flying an American flag, which they did. But as far as their anti-submarine tactics as compared to ours, the United States, or even the Brits, or I guess you could say the Allies, they were light years behind everything that we did. So what you see in this movie, not anywhere close to what the Japanese were actually doing during the war. I mean, they just didn't do it. They weren't close to it at all.
It almost implies that they created, hunter-killer groups, which is
they did not.
Is a very, American and British things, is task force of ships dedicated to just ruthlessly hunting down submarines. And really, the Japanese, it was just sort of, let's just get away from where we just got attacked. If we sink one, great.
Yeah. If they stumbled across one, they'd laid the depth charges on it for sure. But it was far from what you see in the movie. Well, Josh, I'll start with you because you're sitting here next to me. Did you like this movie and would you recommend it?
Yeah, definitely. I would recommend this movie to anyone that wants to learn about submarines, get an idea for the experience, and anyone that just likes a good movie. Yeah. Definitely. I really enjoyed it.
Mike?
Yeah, I have to confess, when we were talking about Tora 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 for an episode a few months ago, you talked about how that was a movie that you sort of grew up watching as a kid. You had fond memories of it. Run Silent, Run Deep is that movie for me. I remember the first time I saw this, I stumbled across it late one night on Channel 12, the local PBS station. I was like 11 or 12, and I saw it, and I went, my goodness, this is an exciting movie. I was really into it. And I hadn't seen it, though. I haven't seen it in probably 25 years until I rewatched it for this episode. And I was so pleased that it lived up to my memory. It was really engaging. And one thing I didn't realize in my first watching years ago was how good Don Rickles is in this movie. This was his first feature film. And man, he's got a star quality. He really, every scene in which he has lines, he commands the camera. That you watch him. He's the guy you watch. He's not, calling anybody a hockey puck. He's not doing his shtick. He's acting. He's full on acting in this movie. So I was really impressed by that. But the whole cast did a good job. I enjoyed this movie thoroughly from beginning to end.
Kaylee?
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's I had honestly never seen it until I got asked to do this podcast, and I've watched it 3 times now. It's great. It's really great.
Yeah, like you, Mike, I actually hadn't seen it, up until probably 3-4 years ago, but I'd seen it twice. And last night, or not last night, night before last rather, was the first time I'd watched it, or in several years, and the second time I'd ever watched it. And I watched it, and about 3/4 of the way through it, my wife Heidi was sitting next to me, and she looks up and she goes, "This is a damn good movie." I said, "It really is. It's a really good movie."
It's Heidi approved.
It is, and that's for her to approve of a war flick. It's got to be pretty damn good. So, it is a good movie, and I would highly recommend it for all the reasons that everybody said here. Not the least of which is if you want to see how the inner workings of a U.S. Pacific Fleet boat worked, check this flick out. It'll show you. Final thoughts. Josh, can you sum it up?
Hey, damn good movie. I mean, it's just a very entertaining, solid movie. Interesting. It's got a lot of depth to it. Just enjoy watching it.
I think it's the epitome of the submarine genre. Really, if you like that, what a good submarine movie can give you, this one ticks all the boxes.
I agree with Mike, but I also think it's kind of it's one for nerds. If you're really into the details of the gear, the equipment, and those things, I think you'll really like it. It's a classic, and especially in that regard.
No, I agree. It is one for the nerds for sure, but it's also it's a good story.
You don't have to be a nerd to appreciate it.
Definitely.
You'll see past the tech and just get into the story.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's a really, really good story, and I mean, it is a little far-fetched. Seemingly every submarine movie there's some sort of conflict between the XO and the CO, and it's not saying that didn't happen, because it did. But it just didn't happen as often as shown in submarine movies. But if you take that out of the equation and you just listen to the story, or watch the story rather, and just listen to all the things that are going on in the film, I think it's great. I really do. I think it's underrated. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something that, when you go to see World War II submarine movies, it's probably not one of the first ones that comes to your mind. And it probably should be, because it's better than Operation Pacific. It's better than Destination Tokyo. And I have to say it's better than Operation Petticoat, although Operation Petticoat is much funnier. And it does have Cary Grant, and Cary Grant's cool anyway. So.
Yes, sir.
But, anyway, I want to thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, listen to our mini episode next week, where we will share oral histories from those who were in the silent service. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer, Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer, Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.